Hello dear viewers. Today, we are starting an incredibly captivating and emotional story. This is the tale of Amaka and her husband, filled with love, emotions, and trials. Will Amaka be able to prove her love and save her relationship? This suspenseful and heartfelt story will take you back to the days when you were lost in your own love. So, without any further delay, let's begin this fascinating journey. Chijioke stood in his opulent office, gazing out at the city lights twinkling in the distance. He had everything: wealth, power, and success. But as he stared into the night, something gnawed at him, a feeling that wouldn't go away. Despite all his achievements, there was one thing he couldn't control: trust. He had worked tirelessly to build his empire, but now, a lingering doubt clouded his mind. His young wife, Amaka, seemed perfect in every way: beautiful, intelligent, and loving. But Chijioke couldn't help but wonder if her love for him was genuine or if it was only for the life he had given her. It wasn't the first time he'd questioned someone's loyalty. In his years of business dealings, he had seen people come and go, driven by the allure of money and status, but when that was no longer available, they vanished just as quickly. Now, Chijioke wondered if his own wife might be the same. Was she with him because of who he was, or what he could provide? He loved her deeply, but the fear of being deceived kept growing. Chijioke knew he couldn't go on living in uncertainty. He needed to find out the truth, and he was willing to do whatever it took to uncover it, no matter how painful or drastic the method. The answers he sought were buried somewhere deep, and he was determined to find them, even if it meant risking everything he had built. Chijioke sat in his study, the weight of his thoughts pressing down on him. The doubts about Amaka had been growing, and he knew he couldn't face them alone. He needed help, someone he could trust completely. His eyes turned toward the door as he picked up his phone. He dialed Emmanuel, his loyal driver of over a decade, and Dr. Kolu, his trusted personal doctor, who had been with him through thick and thin. Both had always been by his side, but today, he would ask them for something he never imagined. As he waited for them to arrive, his mind raced. The plan was dangerous, unpredictable, but it was the only way to know for sure whether Amaka's love was real. When Emmanuel and Dr. Kolu finally walked into the room, Chijioke wasted no time. His voice was calm, yet there was an edge of urgency in it. "I need you both to help me with something." Unorthodox, he said, his eyes never leaving theirs. "I need to know if Amaka really loves me. So, I'm going to stage an accident. Make her believe I'm paralyzed." Emmanuel's face twisted with concern, while Dr. Kolu simply raised an eyebrow. "What are you trying to prove with this?" Dr. Kolu asked, his tone laced with disbelief. Chijioke took a deep breath. "I need to know if she's with me for the right reasons," he explained. "If she stays by my side through this, I'll know it's real." There was a heavy silence before Emmanuel finally spoke, his voice filled with hesitation. "This is a big risk, sir. What if something goes wrong?" Chijioke's gaze hardened. "We'll make sure it looks real, but safe. That's where you both come in." He paused, locking eyes with each of them. "Emmanuel, you'll drive the car when it happens. Dr. Kolu, you'll be there to back up the story. Amaka has to believe I'm paralyzed. Can I count on you both?" The two men exchanged a brief look, their concerns obvious, but Chijioke's determination was undeniable. Finally, Emmanuel sighed. "All right, sir. We'll do it your way." Dr. Kolu shook his head slowly but nodded in agreement. "This will have consequences. Are you sure you want to go through with it?" Chijioke nodded resolutely, feeling a rush of adrenaline. "I've never been more certain. This is the only way to get the truth." Chijioke sat at his desk, his mind focused on the plan he had just set in motion. It felt strange, even wrong, but he couldn't shake the nagging doubt that had taken root in his heart. If Amaka's love for him was real, this was the only way to prove it. The idea of faking paralysis was extreme, but the more he thought about it, the more certain he became. He needed to know the truth. Emmanuel and Dr. Kolu stood across from him, waiting for the details of the plan. Chijioke's voice was steady, but there was a tension in the air that made everything feel heavier than usual. "We are going to stage an accident," he said, his eyes locked on both of them. "I need to make Amaka believe I've been paralyzed. Emmanuel, you'll be the one driving. When the accident happens, make it look convincing, but don't hurt anyone." Emmanuel's eyes widened slightly, but he said nothing. He had been loyal to Chijioke for years, but this was something new, something dangerous. Dr. Kolu crossed his arms, his brow furrowing with concern. "Chijioke, this is a serious thing you're asking us to do. Faking a spinal injury could have serious consequences, not just for you, but for everyone involved." "I understand the risks," Chijioke replied calmly, his voice unwavering. "But I need to know if Amaka loves me for who I am, or just for what I give her. If she stays by my side through this, I'll know her love is real." There was a long pause. Emmanuel shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Dr. Kolu before nodding slowly. "All right, sir. We'll do it. But I need to know exactly how this will go down." Chijioke's lips curved into a tight, determined smile. "Tomorrow night. We'll drive down the old road. You'll take a sharp turn, and I'll brace myself. We'll make sure it looks like a real crash." His eyes flickered to Dr. Kolu. "You'll be there to confirm the injury. You'll tell Amaka I've damaged my spine beyond repair." Dr. Kolu sighed but nodded. "This will be difficult to pull off, but I'll do my part." Chijioke felt a strange calmness settle over him as he looked at his two trusted men. The plan was set, and the truth was within his reach. The weight of what he was about to do felt like a heavy burden, but it was the only way to find out if Amaka's love for him was real or just another illusion. The night was quiet, the only sound being the hum of the car engine as Emmanuel drove down the empty road. Chijioke sat in the back seat, his heart racing with a mix of nerves and determination. This was it, the moment when everything would change. He glanced out the window at the dark, desolate road ahead. They were almost there. Emmanuel spoke, his voice steady but low. "We are close, sir. You ready?" Chijioke nodded, swallowing hard. "Just do it like we practiced. Make it look real, but keep it safe." Emmanuel's grip tightened on the wheel as they approached the sharp bend where the accident was supposed to happen. The plan was simple: Emmanuel would jerk the wheel, sending the car into the ditch. The crash would look real, but it had to be controlled just enough to make Amaka believe everything was falling apart. Chijioke braced himself, his fingers clutching the seat as the car hit the curve. Emmanuel turned the wheel sharply, and the car lurched, sliding off the road and crashing into the ditch with a loud thud. The impact was strong enough to send Chijioke forward, his body slamming into the seatbelt. He groaned, his chest tight with pain, pretending to be dazed as the car came to a stop. For a few moments, everything was still. Chijioke's breaths were shallow, his mind focused on keeping up the act. He couldn't afford to break character now. Through blurry eyes, he saw Emmanuel reach for his phone. "I'll call Dr. Kolu," Emmanuel said, his voice tinged with worry. Chijioke lay still, his body limp, and played his part perfectly. He couldn't move, couldn't speak too loudly. He had to sell this. Minutes later, the sound of sirens filled the air. The flashing lights of the ambulance lit up the darkness as paramedics rushed to the scene. They treated the situation like an emergency, lifting Chijioke carefully onto a stretcher. His body felt numb, every muscle locked in place, but he didn't flinch. The lie had to be flawless. Dr. Kolu was by his side almost immediately, directing the paramedics with a calm, practiced voice. "Careful with his spine, he instructed, pretending to assess the damage. "We suspect a spinal injury." Chijioke's heart thudded in his chest as they loaded him into the ambulance. He kept his eyes closed, his breathing slow and controlled. Every part of this had to be convincing, or all of this would have been for nothing. The only thing that mattered now was whether Amaka would show up, whether she would stay by his side. As the doors of the ambulance closed, Chijioke caught Dr. Kolu's gaze. The doctor nodded, a silent confirmation that everything was in place. The plan had been set in motion, and now, all they could do was wait. Amaka's phone rang, and her heart skipped a beat when she saw Emmanuel's name on the screen. Without hesitating, she answered. "Emmanuel, what happened? Is everything okay?" The voice on the other end was strained. "There's been an accident, Amaka. Chijioke, we're not sure if he'll walk again. It's bad." Her breath caught in her throat, and before Emmanuel could say another word, she was already rushing out the door. Her mind raced with panic as she grabbed her coat and keys. She couldn't process the words. Chijioke, her Chijioke, the man who had always been strong and full of life hurt. She couldn't bear the thought. She sped through the streets, her hands gripping the wheel tightly as the world outside blurred. The hospital was a cold, imposing building when she finally arrived, and her feet felt heavy as she rushed through the doors. She asked for directions, her voice trembling with urgency. When she reached Chijioke's room, her eyes fell on him lying in bed, pale and unmoving. The sight of him, so still, sent a chill through her. Her heart pounded as she stepped closer, her hands shaking. She reached out, touching his hand, her voice breaking. "Chijioke, can you hear me? Please, talk to me." His eyes fluttered open, and he gave her a weak, pained look. "Amaka," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Tears welled in her eyes as she leaned in closer. "I'm here. I'm right here, my love," she whispered back, her voice filled with fear. She clasped his hand tightly, unwilling to let go. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. How could this have happened? Was he really hurt this badly? Dr. Kolu stepped into the room, his expression serious. "Amaka, we've done all we can for now," he said gently, his voice soft but firm. "There's significant damage to his spine. It's going to take time to know if he'll ever walk again." Amaka's knees felt weak as the words hit her like a physical blow. She staggered back, her body trembling with the weight of the news. She tried to steady herself, her gaze never leaving Chijioke. The love of her life, lying there in front of her, so vulnerable. She had never seen him like this before. "Don't leave me, Chijioke," she whispered, her voice full of raw emotion. "I can't lose you. Please." The room seemed to shrink around her, the sounds of the hospital fading as her world narrowed to just the two of them. She stayed by his side all night, never leaving, holding his hand as if the act could somehow make things better. Fear and worry gripped her heart, but she refused to let go. She would stay, no matter what. The soft beeping of machines was the only sound that filled the room. Chijioke lay motionless, his body still, while Amaka sat by his side, her hand firmly clutching his. Her eyes were red from crying, but she refused to leave him for a second. She hadn't moved, hadn't taken a break. Every part of her was focused on him, as if she could will him back to life with her presence alone. "I'm not going anywhere," Amaka whispered, her voice cracked with emotion. She looked at him, her gaze full of love and worry, as if the weight of the world was on her shoulders. "I'll stay right here with you, Chijioke. You're going to get through this." Her words, full of raw emotion, seemed to confirm what she felt deep down, a deep commitment to him. She wasn't leaving him now, not when he needed her most. The sincerity in her voice was undeniable, and to anyone watching, it seemed like the love she had for him was real, unwavering. But as much as Amaka's distress was apparent, Emmanuel and Dr. Kolu were still keeping a close eye on her, their faces guarded, their minds busy. Emmanuel, leaning against the doorframe, exchanged a look with Dr. Kolu. Neither of them had said much since the accident, but both men were quietly observing. They could see the pain in Amaka's eyes, but something still didn't sit right with them. They had known Chijioke for years, seen how he built everything he had, his empire, his life, and now, they couldn't help but wonder if Amaka's devotion was genuine. Dr. Kolu cleared his throat softly, glancing over at Emmanuel. "She seems genuine, doesn't she?" he said, though his tone was filled with uncertainty. Emmanuel's gaze lingered on Amaka, watching her stroke Chijioke's hand softly. "It's hard to say. She's clearly upset, but the question still remains, how long will that last? How much of this is love, and how much is the shock of the moment?" Dr. Kolu nodded, his eyes never leaving the scene before him. "I suppose only time will tell. But we need to remember why we're here. We need to see how she reacts when the pressure is real. Does she truly care for him, or is this just the fear of losing someone who's given her everything?" Both men fell silent, their minds still churning with doubt, as they continued to observe Amaka's every move. The tension in the room was thick. Chijioke's fate hung in the balance, and so did Amaka's place in his life. Would her actions in the coming days speak louder than her words now? For Amaka, there was no question she would stay, and she would fight for him. But for Emmanuel and Dr. Kolu, the real test had only just begun. As the night stretched on, the sterile lights of the hospital flickered softly, casting long shadows across the room. Chijioke lay motionless, his body still, but his mind raced with thoughts he couldn't shake. Was Amaka's love real, or had it all been a facade, a game played to secure her place in his world of wealth and power? He had built an empire from the ground up, but now, lying helpless in a hospital bed, he couldn't help but wonder if his greatest asset was the one thing he couldn't see: her loyalty. The question gnawed at him, twisting his heart between the flickers of hope and doubt. Amaka, on the other hand, sat vigilantly by his side, her eyes swollen and red from lack of sleep. The memory of the accident replayed in her mind, each vivid image a stark reminder of the fragility of life. She hadn't slept for hours, her mind caught between worry for Chijioke's health and the weight of the growing fear that this situation might break them. Her hand clutched his, her fingers trembling ever so slightly as she brushed back the strands of hair that fell over his forehead. She stayed by him even as the hours dragged on, showing an outward devotion that hid the turmoil she felt inside. The future seemed uncertain, like a vast, dark sea, and no matter how much she told herself she was strong, the doubt began to creep in. Was she strong enough to carry both of them through this storm? The room, heavy with silence, held a sense of anticipation. Something was about to happen, and neither of them knew what it would be. The tension, thick like a storm cloud, hung in the air, waiting to burst. The soft beeping of the machines beside Chijioke's bed was the only sound that filled the room, a cold reminder of the fragility of life. Dr. Kolu stood at the foot of the bed, his eyes scanning the charts in his hands, his face unreadable. He took a deep breath before turning to Amaka, his voice gentle but filled with gravity. "Amaka," he began, his tone measured, "I'm afraid the extent of Chijioke's injuries is severe. He has suffered damage to his spine, and the paralysis is extensive. His chances of regaining movement are extremely slim." Amaka's breath caught in her throat as the words settled in. The weight of the diagnosis hit her like a wave, a suffocating rush of sorrow that she couldn't push away. She looked at Chijioke, lying still in the bed, and her heart ached. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away, her voice trembling but determined as she turned back to Dr. Kolu. "I'll take care of him," she declared firmly, though the tremor in her words betrayed the doubt she felt inside. "I'm not going anywhere. We'll get through this, together." Dr. Kolu nodded, though his eyes held a flicker of concern. He had seen many spouses react this way in the face of tragedy, promising devotion and care, but the reality of long-term care was always more complicated than it seemed. Still, he needed to ask the question. "Amaka," he said softly, pulling her aside to speak privately, "taking care of Chijioke is going to require more than just emotional strength. This journey will be physically draining, financially overwhelming, and emotionally exhausting. Are you truly prepared for all of that?" Amaka paused, her eyes briefly clouded with uncertainty, but she squared her shoulders, standing tall as she faced him. "I love him," she said, her voice steady despite the crack that lingered in it. "I married him for better or worse, and this is just another challenge. I will care for him, no matter what it takes." Dr. Kolu studied her face, looking for any sign of hesitation, but all he saw was unwavering resolve. He wondered for a moment if she was truly committed, or if, on some level, she knew this was all part of the test, a test that would reveal her true feelings. But there was no way to be sure yet, no way to read the depth of her words. So guys, that's it for today's journey. We'll continue the rest in the next part. Let us know in the comments where you're watching this story from and how you're enjoying it. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. See you in the next part.